Hey everybody, I'm back. What's up? This is Jeff Richardson, aka El Jefe Tacoma, and I have a bunch of podcasts. One of them is Everything is Awesome, and we have a segment there called "It's the Writing Process." Wait, it's the writing process. But y'all know that if you've listened to the show or if you've watched any of these streams, it would be weird for you to watch part 9 of this stream, but welcome if that is the case. All right. Chapter 27. Mary Greenhill, revenging the murdered Fowler, was the only one of the conspirators who seemed moved more by homicidal hate than by a certain incredulous feeling that it was all a good but slightly absurd game. But to her, hate and the determination to kill were tonic. She soared up from the shadowed pit of grief, and her eyes lighted, her voice had a trembling gaiety. She threw away her weeds and came out in defiant colors. Oh, they had to economize these days to put every available penny into the missionary fund of the new underground. But Mary had become so fire drawn that she could wear Sissy's giddiest old frocks. She had more daring than Julian or even Buck. Indeed, led Buck into his riskiest. Indeed, led Bug. Indeed, led Buck into his riskiest expeditions. Riskiest expositions? Fuck you, Sinclair Lewis. Oh my God. He totally challenges his reader never to read this out loud. It's incredible. Riskiest expeditions. Maybe it's easier with a New England accent. Riskiest expeditions. There you go. All right. Sparking up a J. This is Paris OG from the Paris Company. Here we go. In mid-afternoon, Buck and Mary, looking very matrimonial, domestically accompanied by David and the rather doubtful Foolish, ambled through the center of Burlington, where none of them were known, though a number of dogs, city slickers, and probably con dogs insisted to the rustic and embarrassed foolish that they had met him somewhere. It was Buck who muttered, "Right," from time to time when they were free from being observed, but it was Mary who calmly, a yard or two from MMs or policemen, distributed crumpled up copies of A Little Sunday School Life of John Sullivan Reek. John Sullivan Reek, second class political crook, and certain entertaining pictures of Colonel Dewey Hake, torturer. These crumpled pamphlets she took from a specially made inside pocket of her mink coat, one reaching from shoulder to waist. It had been recommended by John Polycop, whose helpful lady had aforetime used just such a pocket for illicit booze. The crumpling had been done carefully, Seen from 2 yards away, the pamphlets looked like any waste paper, but each was systematically so wadded up that the words, printed in bold red type, quote, Hake himself kicked an old man to death, caught the eye. And lying in corner trash baskets, in innocent toy wagons before hardware stores, among oranges in a fruit store where they had gone to buy David a bar of chocolate, they caught some hundreds of eyes in Burlington that day. On their way home, with David sitting in front beside Buck and Mary in the back, she cried, That will stir them up. But, oh, when Daddy has finished his booklet on Swan, God. David peeped back at her. She sat with eyes closed. She sat with eyes closed, with hands clenched. He whispered to Buck, I wish Mother wouldn't get so excited. She's the finest woman living, Dave. I know it, but she scares me so. One scheme Mary devised and carried out by herself. From the magazine counter in Tyson's drugstore, she stole a dozen copies of the Reader's Digest and a dozen larger magazines. When she returned them, they looked untouched, but each of the larger magazines contained a leaflet, Get ready to join Walt Trowbridge, and each digest had become the cover for a pamphlet, Lies of the Corpo Press. I wonder if I should comment on any of this. Um, it's rough the way oppressed people can be changed. Um, seemingly, I mean, I guess this is what happened to me. Seemingly mild mannered people transformed into hotheads and maniacs, if it's uh proper to use that word. As a person with bipolar disorder, I'm gonna use it. Why not? And also a trauma survivor. So, all right. To serve as center of their plot, to be able to answer the telephone and receive fugitives and put off suspicious snoopers 24 hours a day. When Buck and the rest might be gone, Lorinda chucked her small remaining interest in the Beulah Valley Tavern and became Buck's housekeeper, living in the place. There was scandal, but in a day when it was increasingly hard to get enough bread and meat, the town folk had little time to suck scandal like lollipops. And anyway, who could much suspect this nagging uplifter who so obviously preferred tuberculin tests to toying with Corydon in the glade? And as Doremus was always about, as sometimes he stayed overnight, for the first time these timid lovers had space for passion. I don't catch the references, but I see what's happening here. It had never been their loyalty to the good Emma, since she was too contented to be pitied, too sure of her necessary position in life to be jealous, so much as hatred of a shabby hole and corner intrigue which had made their love cautious and grudging. Neither of them was so simple as to suppose that, even with quite decent people, Love is always as monogamic as bread and butter, yet neither of them liked sneaking. Her room at Buck's, large and square and light, with old landscape paper showing an endlessness of little mandarins daintily stepping out of sedan chairs beside pools laced with willows, with a four poster, a colonial highboy, and a crazy colored rag carpet, became in 2 days, so fast did one live now in time of revolution, the best loved home Doremus had ever known. As eagerly as a young bridegroom, he popped into and out of her room, and he was not overly particular about the state of her toilet. And Buck knew all about it. Excuse me. And Buck knew all about it and just laughed. Released now, Dorema saw her as physically more alluring. With parochial superiority, he had noted during vacations on Cape Cod how often the fluffy women of fashion, when they stripped to bathing suits, were skinny, to him unwomanly, with thin shoulder blades and with backbones as apparent as though they were chains fastened down their backs. They seemed passionate to him and a little devilish, with their thin, restless legs and avid lips. But he chuckled as he considered that the Lorinda, whose prim gray suits and blouses seemed so much more virginal than the gay, flaunting summer cottons of the bright young things, was softer of skin to the touch, much richer in the curve from shoulder to breast. This is just it just feels like Sinclair Lewis telling us what he thinks is hot. Maybe in the 30s the fashion was super skinniness. Um I don't know. This goes on a lot. I've probably done this in my books. It's like, yeah, my main character is tall and strong and fit, like but I try not to go into it too much because, you know, we're a little smarter these days, you know, treat female characters the same way that you treat male characters. So it's funny, I have actually started talking about the looks of my male characters just so that it makes sense that they would be in the same I don't know. People generally are in the same attractiveness level if they're attracted to each other. It's just something that happens biologically. I don't know why. Um, it feels a little unfair, you know? I hear some people talk about the privilege of looks, and it's like, yeah, it's true. But it's also just something that happens, I think. Uh, Maybe it's just about status and culture, but yeah, it happens. And anyway, in this case, it's just a dude writing about chicks he thinks are fine. He rejoiced to know that she was always there in the house, that he could interrupt the high seriousness of a tract on bond issues to dash out to the kitchen and brazenly let his arm slide round her waist. She, the theoretically independent feminist, became flatteringly demanding about every attention. Why hadn't he brought her some candy from town? Would he mind awfully calling up Julian for her? Why hadn't he remembered to bring her the book he had promised? Well, would have promised if she had only remembered to ask him for it. He trotted on her errands, idiotically happy. Long ago, Emma had reached the limit of her imagination in regard to demands. He was discovering that in love, it is really more blessed to give than to receive. A proverb about which, as an employer and as a steady fellow whom forgotten classmates regularly tried to touch for loans, he had been very suspicious. Well, he packed a lot of stuff in there. Sort of retrograde ideas about his wife. I mean, it really, the subtext that comes across, whether the author meant it or not, is that he's tired of his wife. She got boring. And it's like, maybe this is true, but it's also extremely frustrating that one can be in a relationship and get bored with the very things that are so annoying. I mean, when I just think about my exes and the things that annoyed me most about them, a lot of them is this inscrutable bullshit, them constantly keeping you guessing, and never just being satisfied, you know? Uh, and a lot of it probably has to do with my brain, the things I like, which is, yeah, I like the gifts, I like the attention, but mostly I like praise. What are my love languages? Praise and helping out, you know, actions, I guess. Um, Concern, long conversations. Really interesting, Jeff. Really important to the story and to our lives. Okay. Again, I think this is a thing that happens when an author starts to go into this really personal shit. Your mind just kind of goes there. He lay beside her in the wide four poster at dawn, March dawn, with the elm branches outside the window, ugly and writhing in the wind, but with the last coals still snapping in the fireplace, and he was utterly content. He glanced at Lorinda, who had on her sleeping face a frown that made her look not older, but schoolgirlish. A schoolgirl who was frowning comically over some small woe, and who defiantly clutched her old fashioned lace bordered pillow. He laughed. They were going to be so adventurous together. This little printing of pamphlets was only the beginning of their revolutionary activities. They would penetrate into press circles in Washington and get secret information. He was drowsily vague about what information they were going to get and how they would ever get it, which would explode the Corpo state. And with the revolution over, they would go to Bermuda, to Martinique, lovers on purple peaks by a purple sea, everything purple and grand. Or, as he sighed and became heroic, as he exquisitely stretched and yawned in the wide, warm bed, if they were defeated, if they were arrested and condemned by the MMs, they would die together, sneering at the firing squad, refusing to have their eyes bandaged, and their fame, like that of Servetus and Matteotti and Professor Ferrer and the Haymarket martyrs, would roll on forever, acclaimed by children waving little flags. Give me a cigarette, darling. So at one point, this is true. I experienced this with my wife the first time we were trying to revolt against President Bush. first Iraq war, trying to stop that war, this keeps bunching up around my gut. God damn it. I gotta buy all new clothes. Anyway, so in a way, this is true, but it's also extremely embarrassing. It's awkward, just everything is coming through like a self-insert. I gotta wonder what Sinclair Lewis's wife thought about this if he was married at the time. Oh God. But it is true when you're in activism, part of what sustains you and what compels you is your heroes and your stories that you've heard. I was on a show called oh my god, uh uh Hotties in History, Historical Hotties, with the Nelson sisters and my former partner, Casey, and we brought Harriet Tubman. Oh, you bring like a historical figure and then you talk about all their different qualities and are they hot or not or whatever. And by the end they have a score and it's, I don't know, it's hilarious. But we talked for hours, they edit it down, but we talked for a long time about Harriet Tubman, about Huey Newton, um uh Francisco, who's the guy? Oh shit. Algerian socialist thinker, Fritz Fanon, and then the White Rose Society, the brother and sister team from the White Rose Society, who were killed um, in their efforts to stop Hitler and the Nazis. And we talked out all this. Huey Newton is extremely handsome and has like charisma. Fanon, like super smart. Harriet Tubman, I mean, hero. Should have been a colonel in the U.S. Army during the war against the South. The war for the Union, Civil War. That's what it's called. Just a heroic, incredible figure. But at the end of the day, it's about romance. Like, there's something about those 2, the White Rose Society kids, I can't remember their names, but they died young and hot, right? Like, we have pictures of Harriet when she's super old and been through all this shit and, like, probably PTSD, haggard. These 2 kids were in the prime of their youth, fighting for truth. A college student's always sexy, and so they won, and it just felt so weird afterwards, like these, because the white kids beat the black people. Like, it was just I had a whole lot of complicated feelings afterwards. But I think at the end of the day, like, as an activist, you have these images of your heroes, and part of it was that they died for the cause. They were martyred. Gandhi lived a long life. um uh Dr. King, he was in his 30s when he died, but, like, achieved a whole shit ton. Fritz Fanon had several books and has a huge impact on just methods and society of revolution in Africa. um Huey Newton, like the Black Panthers, for fuck's sake, like, whereas the White Rose Society lasted like a year and then they were killed. Like, there's a romance to, I mean, exactly what he says, right? The And part of that is we never saw I don't know, they never got old and they never fucked up. They never had any downside to their character or anything. Uh, so you can make movies about them and it's all pretty and shit. Weird tangent. Lorinda was regarding him with a beady and skeptical eye. You oughtn't to smoke so much. You oughtn't to boss so much. Oh, my darling. She sat up, kissed his eyes and temples, and sturdily climbed out of bed, seeking her own cigarette. Doremus, it's been marvelous to have this companionship with you, but She looked a little timid, sitting cross legged on the rattan topped stool before the old mahogany dressing table. No silver or lace or crystal was there, but only plain wooden hairbrush and scant luxury of small drugstore bottles. But, darling, this cause, oh, curse that word cause. Can't I ever get free of it? Ah, God, this might be him. Ah, no, it's not. But anyway, this new underground business seems to me so important. And I know you feel that way too, but I've noticed that since we've settled down together, two awful sentimentalists, you aren't so excited about writing your nice venomous attacks, and I'm getting more cautious about going out distributing tracks. I have a foolish idea I have to save my life for your sake, and I ought to be only thinking about saving my life for the revolution. Don't you feel that way? Don't you? Don't you? Dorima swung his legs out of bed, also lighted an unhygienic cigarette, and said grumpily, "Oh, I suppose so. But tracks? Your attitude is simply a holdover of your religious training, that you have a duty toward the dull human race, which probably enjoys being bullied by Windrip and getting bread and circuses. Except for the bread. I just I know this is Sinclair Lewis and this is the '30s or whatever, but like sometimes he gets it like they speak so honestly and truthfully in each other's company. Uh, and sometimes they're just I don't know if it's the romance of the scene, but it just feels so false, you know? Same long sentences, same fucking dumb jokes. It's like, can we just cut the bullshit? We're like naked in our bedroom. Anyway, of course it's religious. A revolutionary loyalty. Why not? It's one of the few real religious feelings. A rational, unsentimental Stalin is still kind of a priest. No wonder most preachers hate the Reds and preach against them. They're jealous of their religious power. But, oh, we can't unfold the world this morning, even over breakfast coffee, Doremus. When Mr. Dimmick came back here yesterday, he ordered me to Beecher Falls, you know, on the Canadian border, to take charge of the NU cell there, ostensibly to open up a tea room for this summer. So hang it, I've got to leave you, and leave Buck and Sis, and go. Hang it. Linda. She would not look at him. She made much, too much of grinding out her cigarette. Linda. Yes? You suggested this to Dimmick. He never gave any orders till you suggested it. Well, Linda, Linda, do you want to get away from me so much? You, my life. She came slowly to the bed, slowly sat down beside him. Yes, get away from you and get away from myself. The world's in chains, and I can't be free to love till I help tear them off. It will never be out of chains. Then I shall never be free to love. Oh, if we could only have run away together for one sweet year when I was 18, then I would have lived two whole lives. Well, nobody seems to be very lucky at turning the clock back, almost 25 years back, too. I'm afraid now is a fact you can't dodge. And I've been getting so just this last 2 weeks, with April coming in, that I can't think of anything but you. Kiss me. I'm going today. Fuck. As much as I was just complaining, because I do this every time, that shit is real. I know I always make this dumb reference, but it's because I don't watch a lot of spy shit. Um, so I only have a few references. But Chuck, two main characters are in love with each other, the whole thing, start to finish. And what divides them is work, right? The main character woman, I'm shocked that I can't remember her name. But she's a true believer, like Lorinda. She's a workaholic, like Lorinda. Like she goes hard. And they don't have this dynamic, but what Lorinda and Doremus have is she's always been the younger woman, obsessed with this married man. He's always been this older man, obsessed with this younger woman. And it that dynamic, as like embarrassing and dumb as it is, it's real. And him, when he was in his 40s, falling in love with an 18-year-old, staying away from each other for all this time. That shit's also real. And it's so fucking stupid. There's this character in Commedia dell'arte called Puccinello, who's the quintessential sad older man who's more or less impotent, who's obsessed with his younger woman. It's like, as in, I played that character in mythology class when I was 17 or whatever. And back then it was ridiculous and silly. And then I was in my late 30s and I fell in love. Wait, was I 40? No. It's embarrassing either way. I fell in love with a 20-year-old and I wasn't married, but like at one point I was with somebody, like it was just dumb and nothing ever came of it like this. Thank God. Um, except it was almost like we had a thing and then I found out she was a libertarian and it got weird and pro-military, like it's yeah. So who knows? It probably would have gone nowhere anyway. But mostly what I remember is this sad, pathetic thing. And you know, if she gets to age 30 or 40 and we reconnect, like I don't know. Fuck, now I'm just embarrassed that I told that story. Mm. Boy, howdy. So that's chapter 27. This has been embarrassing, for everyone involved, I'm sure. Oh god. Mm. Chapter 28. As usually happens in Secret Service, no one detail that Sissy ferreted out of Shad Ledoux was drastically important to the NU. But like necessary bits of a picture puzzle, when added to other details picked up by Doremus and Buck and Mary and Father Parafix, that trained extractor of confessions, they showed up the rather simple schemes of this gang of corpo racketeers who were so touchingly accepted by the people as patriotic shepherds. Sissy lounged with Julian on the porch on a deceptively mild April day. Golly, like to take you off camping. Oh, this is Julian. Golly, like to take you off camping. Couple months from now, sis. Just the two of us. Canoe and sleep in a pump tent. canoe and sleep in a pup tent. Oh, sis, do you have to have supper with Ledoux and Staubmeyer tonight? I hate it. God, how I hate it. I warn you, I'll kill Shad. I mean it. Yes, I do have to, dear. I think I've got Shad crazy enough about me so that tonight, when he chases good old Emil, and whatever foul female Emil may bring out of the place, I'll get him to tell me something about who they're planning to pinch next. I'm not scared of Shad, my Julian of Julians. Ah, for fuck's sake. That is clearly a bad poet slash old man who thinks he knows what 18-year-olds are like. Goof. Bad. So bad. He did not smile. He said with a gravity that had been unknown to the lively college youth, "Do you realize, with your kidding yourself about being able to handle Comrade Shad so well, that he's husky as a gorilla and just about as primitive? One of these nights, God, I think of it, maybe tonight, he'll go right off the deep end and grab you and bing." She was as grave. "Julian, just what do you think could happen to me? The worst that could happen would be that I'd get raped." Too late for a content warning. Fuck. Good Lord. Do you honestly suppose that since the new civilization began, say in 1914, anyone believes that kind of thing is more serious than busting an ankle? A fate worse than death. What nasty old side-whiskered deacon ever invented that phrase? And how he must have rolled it on his chapped old lips. I could think of plenty worse fates. Say, years of running an elevator? No, wait. I'm not really flippant. I haven't any desire, beyond maybe a slight curiosity, to be raped. At least not by Shad. He's a little too strong on the bodily odor when he gets excited. Oh, God, darling, what a nasty swine that man is. I hate him 50 times as much as you do. Ugh. But I'd be willing to have even that happen if I could save one decent person from his bloody blackjack. I'm not the playgirl of Pleasant Hill anymore. I'm a frightened woman from Mount Terror. So I hate everything about this, and I need to separate one, the extremely insightful Sinclair Lewis that's onto something. Two, the old gross man that's Sinclair Lewis that is absolutely gross. Right? I mean, those both of those things are true, right? Like one, sexual revolution, it's just sex. You know, if it has to happen, I'm in control because it's a job. I'm doing a fucking job to save lives. Okay, right? These are extraordinary circumstances. And as we've seen in movies, as we've heard from women's stories, like this is just part of fucking war. As shitty as that is, like, you know, and she knows it might happen and is putting herself in that place. So that is there and is true. And it's like I said earlier, like Lewis is giving it the weight that it deserves. And yet at the same time, he's giving us this naive, quote unquote, young person who's never been through that experience. And so is thinking they can handle it. Nobody knows how they will handle sexual assault. As a survivor myself, and I mean, we all minimize, but like this small compared to the experiences of others, you know. Uh, I don't want to get into it, but until it happens to you, maybe you can be a little blasé about it or a little sanguine, I think is a better word. Um, and it's once again, it's very complicated, right? And there's no way of knowing if it had was part of Sinclair Lewis's experience or someone close to him. Um, but it's absolutely a tactic of war. So, it needs to be considered. It seemed, oh, here we go. It seemed the whole thing rather unreal to Sissy, a burlesqued version of the old melodramas in which the city villain tries to ruin Arnell, apropos of a bottle of champagne wine. Ooh, it's before even champagne was weird. Shad, even in a belted tweed jacket, a kaleidoscopic Scotch sweater from Minnesota, and white linen pluphors, hadn't the absent minded seductiveness that becomes a city slicker. Ensign Emil Staubmeyer had showed up at Shad's new private suite at the Star Hotel with a grass widow who betrayed her gold teeth and who had tried to repair the erosions in the fair field of her neck with overmuch topsoil of brick tinted powder. She was pretty dreadful. She was harder to she was harder to tolerate than the rumbling Shad, a man for whom the chaplain might even have been a little sorry after he was safely hanged. The synthetic widow was always nudging herself at Emile, and when, rather rather wearily, he obliged by poking her shoulder, she giggled, "Now you stop." Shad's suite was clean and had some air. Beyond that, there was nothing much to say. The parlor was firmly furnished in oak chairs and settee with leather upholstery, and four pictures of marquises not doing anything interesting. The freshness of the linen spread on the brass bedstead in the other room fascinated Sissy uncomfortably. That's really interesting. God, I hate everything about this. Yeah. Uh, like what? She expected Shad to have dirty sheets. He lives in a hotel. I don't know. The whole thing is bizarre. Shad served them rye highballs with ginger ale from a quart bottle that had first been opened at least a day ago, sandwiches with chicken and ham that tasted of niter, and ice cream with 6 colors but only 2 flavors, both strawberry. Then he waited, not too patiently, looking as much like General Goering as possible, for Emil and his woman to get the devil out of here, and for Sissy to acknowledge his virile charms. He only grunted at Emil's pedagogic little jokes, and the man of culture abruptly got up and removed his lady, whinnying in farewell. Now, Captain, don't you and your girlfriend do anything Papa wouldn't do. Oh, another gross wrinkle to this is that Sissy grew up with Shad at the house working, and there's this bizarre fascination with this just nasty older dude. And you think of a handyman, probably buff and whatever, masculine. Come on now, baby. Come over here and give us a kiss. Shad roared as he flopped into the corner of the leather settee. Now I don't know whether I will or not. It nauseated her a good deal, but she made herself as pertly provocative as she could. She minced to the settee and sat just far enough from his hulking side for him to reach over and draw her toward him. She observed him cynically, recalling her experience with most of the boys, though not with Julian. Well, not so much with Julian. They always, all of them, went through the same procedure, heavily pretending that there was no system in their manual proposals. And to a girl of spirit, the chief diversion in the whole business was watching their smirking pride in their technique. The only variation, ever, was whether they started in at the top or the bottom. Ah. Back itch. Yes, she thought so. Shad not being so delicately fanciful as, say, Malcolm Tasbro, started with an apparently careless hand on her knee. She shivered. His sinewy paw was to her like the slime and writhing of an eel. She moved away with a maidenly alarm which mocked the role of Matahari she had felt herself to be gracing. Like me? He demanded. Oh, well, sort of. Oh, shucks. You think I'm still just a hired man, even though I am a county commissioner now, and a battalion leader, and probably pretty soon I'll be a commander. He spoke the sacred names with awe. It was the 20th time he had made the same plaint to her in the same words. And you still think I ain't good for anything and you still think I ain't good for anything except lugging in kindling. Oh, Shad, dear. Why, I always think of you as being just about my oldest playmate. The way I used to tag after you and ask you, could I run the lawnmower? My, I always remember that. Do you? Honest? He yearned at her like a lumpish farm dog. Of course. And honest, it makes me tired. You're acting as if you were ashamed of having worked for us. Why, don't you know that when he was a boy, Daddy used to work as a farmhand and split wood and tend lawn for the neighbors and all that? And he was awful glad to get the money? She she reflected that this thumping and entirely impromptu lie was beautiful. That it happened not to be a lie, she did not know. That a fact? Well, honest. Well, so the old man used to hustle the rake too. Never knew that. You know, he ain't such a bad old coot. Just awful stubborn. You do like him, don't you, Shad? Nobody knows how sweet he is. I mean, in these sort of complicated days, we've got to protect him against people that might not understand him, against outsiders. Don't you think so, Shad? You will protect him. Well, I'll do what I can, said the battalion leader with such fat complacency that Sissy almost slapped him. That is, as long as he behaves himself, baby, and don't get mixed up with any of these red rebels. And as long as you feel like being nice to a fella. He pulled her toward him as though he were hauling a bag of grain out of a wagon. Oh, Shad, you frighten me. Oh, you must be gentle. A big, strong man like you can afford to be gentle. It's only the sissies that have to get rough. And you're so strong. Well, I guess I can still feed myself. Say, talking about sissies, what do you see in a light waisted mollycoddle like Julian? You don't really like him, do you? Oh, you know how it is, she said, trying without too much obviousness to ease her head away from his shoulder. We've always been playmates since we were kids. Well, you just said I was too. Yes, that's so. Now, in her effort to give all the famous pleasures of seduction without taking any of the risk, the amateur Secret Service operative, Sissy, had a slightly confused aim. She was going to get from Shad information valuable to the NU. I don't know what to do with my arms today. Information valuable to the NU, rapidly rehearsing it in her imagination, the while she was supposed to be weakened by the charm of leaning against Shad's meaty shoulder. She heard herself teasing him into giving her the name of some citizen whom the MMs were about to arrest, slickly freeing, slickly, slickly freeing herself from him, dashing out to find Julian. Oh, hang it. Why hadn't she made an engagement with Julian for that night? Well, he'd either be at home or out driving Dr. Olmsted. Julian's melodramatically dashing to the home of the destined victim and starting him for the Canadian border before dawn. And it might be a good idea for the refugee to tack on his door a note dated 2 days ago, saying that he was off on a trip so that Shad would never suspect her. All this in a second of hectic storytelling, neatly illustrated in color by her fancy, while she pretended that she had to blow her nose and thus had an excuse to sit straight. Edging another inch or two away, she purred. But of course it isn't just but of course it isn't just physical strength, Shad. You have so much power politically. My, I imagine you could send almost anybody in Fort Beulah off to concentration camp if you wanted to. Well, I could put a few of them away if they got funny. I'll bet you could, and will too. Who you going to arrest next, Shad? Huh? Oh, come on. Don't be so tightwad with all your secrets. What are you trying to do, baby? Pump me? Why, no, of course not. I just. Sure. You'd like to get the poor old fat head going and find out everything he knows. And that's plenty. You can bet your sweet life on that. Nothing doing, baby. Shad, I just. I just love to see an MM squad arresting somebody once. It must be dreadfully exciting. Oh, it's exciting enough, all right. All right. When the poor chumps try to resist and you throw their radio out the window, or when the fellow's wife gets fresh and shoots off her mouth too much, and so you just teach her a little lesson by letting her look on while you trip him up on the floor and beat him up. Maybe that sounds a little rough, but you see, In the long run, it's the best thing you can do for these beggars because it teaches them not to, because it teaches them not to, because it teaches them not, it's, is this a me problem or a writing problem? Because it teaches them to not get ugly. But you won't think I'm horrid and unwomanly, will you? But I would like to see you hauling out one of these. But I would like to see you hauling out one of those people just once. Come on, tell a fellow. Who are you going to arrest next? Naughty, naughty. Mustn't try to kid Papa. No, the womanly thing for you to do is a little love making. Come on. Let's have some fun, baby. You know you're crazy about me. Now he really seized her, his hand across her breasts. She struggled, thoroughly frightened, no longer cynical and sophisticated. She shrieked, "Oh, don't! Don't!" She wept, real tears, more from anger than from modesty. He loosened his grip a little, and she had the inspiration to sob, "Oh, Shad, if you really want me to love you, you must give me time. You wouldn't want me to be a hussy that you could do anything you wanted to with. You, in your position? Oh, no, Shad, you couldn't do that." "Well, maybe," said he, with the smugness of a carp. She had sprung up, dabbling at her eyes, and through the doorway in the bedroom on a flat top desk, she saw a bunch of 2 or 3 Yale keys. Keys to his office, to secret cupboards and drawers with corpo plans. Undoubtedly, her imagination in 1 second pictured her making a rubbing of the keys, getting John Polycop, that that omnifarious mechanic, to file substitute keys, herself and Julian somehow or other sneaking into Corpo headquarters at night, perilously creeping past the guards, rifling Shad's every dread file. She stammered, "Do you mind if I go in and wash my face? All teary. This is so silly. You don't happen to have any face powder in your bathroom?" "Say, what do you think I am? A hick? Or a monk, maybe? You bet your life I've got some face powder. Right in the medicine cabinet. 2 kinds. How's that for service? Ladies taken care of by the day or hour." It hurt, but she managed something like a giggle before she went in and shut the bedroom door and locked it. She tore across to the keys. She snatched up a pad of yellow scratch paper and a pencil and tried to make a rubbing of a key as once she had made rubbings of coins for use in the small grocery shop of C. Jessup and J. Falk Grocers. The pencil blur showed only the general outline of the key. The tiny notches, which were the trick, would not come clear. In panic, she experimented with a sheet of carbon paper, then toilet paper, dry and wet. She could not get a mold. She pressed the key into a prop hotel candle in a china stick by Shad's bed. The candle was too hard. So was the bathroom soap. And Shad was now trying the knob of the door, remarking, "Damn," then bellowing, "What you doing in there? Gone to sleep?" "Be right out." She replaced the keys, threw the yellow paper and the carbon paper out of the window, replaced the candle and soap, slapped her face with a dry towel, dashed on powder as though she were working against time at plastering a wall, and sauntered back into the parlor. Shad looked hopeful. In panic, she saw that now, before he comfortably sat down to it and became passionate again, was her one time to escape. She snatched up hat and coat, said wistfully, "Another night, Shad. You must let me go now, dear," and fled before he could open his red muzzle. Round the corner in the hotel corridor, she found Julian. He was standing taut, trying to look like a watchdog, his right hand in his coat pocket as though it was holding a revolver. She hurled herself against his bosom and howled. "Good God! What did he do to you? I'll go in and kill him." "Oh, I didn't get seduced. It isn't things like that I'm bawling about. It's because I'm such a simply terribly awful spy." But one thing came out of it. Wait. But one thing came out of it. Her courage nerved Julian to something he had longed for and feared: to join the MMs, put on uniform, quote, work from within, and supply Doremus with information. "I can get Leo Quinn, you know. Dad's a conductor on the railroad. Used to play used to play basketball in high school. I can get him to drive Dr. Olmsted for me and generally run errands for the NU. He's got grit and he hates the corpos. But look, Sissy, look, Mr. Jessup, in order to get the MMs to trust me, I've got to pretend to have a fierce bust up with you and all our friends. Look, Sissy and I will walk up Elm Street tomorrow evening, giving an imitation of estranged lovers. How about it, sis?" "Fine," glowed that incorrigible actress. She was to be every evening at 11 in a birch grove just up Pleasant Hill from the Jessops, where they had played house as children. Because the road curved, the rendezvous could be entered from 4 or 5 directions. There he was to hand on to her his reports of plans. But when he first crept into the grove at night and she nervously turned her pocket torch on him, she shrieked at seeing him in uniform as an inspector. That blue tunic and slanting forage cap, which in the cinema and history books had meant youth and hope, meant only death now. She wondered if in 1864 it had not meant death more than moonlight and magnolias to most women. She sprang to him, holding him as if to protect him against his own uniform, and in the peril and uncertainty now of their love, Sissy began to grow up. I'm going to save the recording and go pee. Well, I hope that wasn't too upsetting for some of you. That was real fraught, super tense. I don't know why I hadn't expected it to be that extreme. Everything else in this story has been so extreme. I always felt the tension, the fear that sort of thing might happen, but man, I'm trying to think of something to say that isn't cliche, but or that I've said 100 times already. Tough stuff, you know? Uh, I think that was one of the things that made me stop watching The Man in the High Castle, which is that the main character in that is like a hot young woman who uses her sexuality to be a spy, and it just grosses me out. And maybe it's just the way I was raised culturally, that sex is something precious or shared between monogamous parties, but and that rape does ruin someone. Um, but really it's just another thing that forges a personality, and that can send some of us into a complete tailspin and break down our psyche, and takes years and years and years to heal from. But that also can be endured. I guess especially the risking it to save the world or whatever. And let's be real, even to this day, just being a woman, um, or a man dating a man, the the risk is extreme. Which is not to say that a woman can't engage in this kind of terrible behavior, but it's just less. It's a different thing. Let's put it that way. It's usually manifest differently. Let's say it's not an ever-present terror by an entire gender. All right. Chapter 29. The propaganda throughout the country was not all to the new underground, not even most of it. And though the pamphleteers for the NU, at home and exiled abroad, included hundreds of the most capable professional journalists of America, they were cramped by a certain respect for facts, which never enfeebled the press agents for corpoism. And the corpos had a notable staff. It included college presidents, some of the most renowned among the radio announcers who aforetime had crooned their affection for mouthwashes and non insomniac coffee, famous ex war correspondents, ex governors, former vice presidents of the American Federation of Labor, and no less an artist than the Public Relations Council of a princely corporation of electrical goods manufacturers. Manufacturers. The newspapers everywhere might no longer be so wishily washily liberal as to print the opinions of non corpos. They might give but little news from those old fashioned and democratic countries, Great Britain, France, and the Scandinavian states. Might indeed print almost no foreign news, except as regards the triumphs of Italy in giving Ethiopia good roads, trains on time, freedom from beggars and from men of honor, and all the other spiritual benefactions of Roman civilization. But on the other hand, never had newspapers shown so many comic strips. The most popular was a very funny one about a preposterous new underground crank who wore morch who wore mortuary black with a high hat decorated with crepe and who was always being comically beaten up by MMs. Never had there been, even in the days when Mr. Hearst was freeing Cuba, so many large red headlines. Never so many dramatic drawings of murders. The murderers were always notorious anti corpos. Never such a wealth of literature, worthy its 24-hour immortality, as the articles proving by figures that American wages were universally higher, commodities universally lower priced, war budgets smaller, but the army and its equipment much larger than ever in history. Never such righteous polemics as the proofs that all non corpos were communists. Almost daily, Windrip, Saracen, Dr. McGoblin, Secretary of War Luthorn, or Vice President Pearlie Beecroft humbly addressed their masters, the great general public, on the radio and congratulated them on making a new world by their example of American solidarity, marching shoulder to shoulder under the grand old flag, comrades in the blessings of peace and comrades in the joys of war to come. Much heralded movies, subsidized by the government, and could there be any better proof of the attention paid by Dr. McGoblin and the other Nazi leaders to the arts than the fact that movie actors who before the days of the chief were receiving only $1,500 a week were now getting 5,000? Showed the MMs driving armored motors at 80 miles an hour, piloting a fleet of 1,000 planes, and being very tender to a little girl with a kitten. Everyone, including Doremus Jessup, had said in 1935, if there ever is a fascist dictatorship here, American humor and pioneer independence are so marked that it will be absolutely different from anything in Europe. For almost a year after Windrip came in, this seemed true. The chief was photographed playing poker, in shirt sleeves and with a derby on the back of his head, with a newspaper man, a chauffeur, and a pair of rugged steelworkers. Dr. McGoblin in person led an Elks brass band and dived in competition with the Atlantic City bathing beauties. It was reportedly it was reputably reported that MMs apologized to political prisoners for having to arrest them, and that the prisoners joked amiably with the guards at first. All that was gone within a year after the inauguration, and surprised scientists discovered that whips and handcuffs hurt just as sorely in the clear American air as in the miasmic fogs of Prussia. Doremus, reading the authors he had concealed in the horsehair sofa, the gallant communist Karl Billinger, the gallant the gallant anti-communist Chernavin, and the gallant neutral Laurent, began to see something like a biology of dictatorships, all dictatorships. The universal apprehension, the timorous denials of faith, the same methods of arrest, sudden pounding on the door late at night, the squad of police pushing in, the blows, the search, the obscene oaths at the frightened women, the third degree by young snipe of officials, the accompanying blows, and then the formal beatings, when the prisoner is forced to count the strokes until he faints, the leprous beds and the sour stew, guards jokingly shooting round and round a prisoner who believes he is being executed, the waiting in solitude to know what will happen till men go mad and hang themselves. Thus had things gone in Germany, exactly thus in Soviet Russia, in Italy and Hungary and Poland, Spain and Cuba and Japan and China. Not very different had it been under the blessings of liberty and fraternity in the French Revolution. All dictators followed the same routine of torture, as if they had all read the same manual of sadistic etiquette. And now, in the humorous, friendly, happy go lucky land of Mark Twain, Dorema saw the homicidal maniacs having just as good a time as they had had in Central Europe. America followed, too, the same ingenious finances as Europe. Windrip had promised to make everybody richer, and had contrived to make everybody, except for a few hundred bankers and industrialists and soldiers, much poorer. He needed no higher mathematicians to produce his financial statement. To produce his financial statements. Any ordinary press agent could do them. To show a 100% economy in military expenditures while increasing the establishment 700%, it had been necessary only to charge up all expenditures for the Minutemen to non-military departments so that their training in the art of bayonet sticking was debited to the Department of Education. To show an increase in average wages, one did tricks with categories of labor and required minimum wages, and forgot to state how many workers ever did become entitled to the minimum, and how much was charged as wages on the books for food and shelter, for the millions in the labor camps. It all made dazzling reading. There had never been more elegant and romantic fiction. Even loyal corpos began to wonder why the armed forces, army and MMs together, were being so increased. Was a frightened Windrip getting ready to defend himself against a rising of the whole nation? Did he plan to attack all of North and South America and make himself an emperor? Or both? In any case, the forces were so swollen that even with its despotic power of taxation, the Corpo government never had enough. They began to force exports, to practice the dumping of wheat, corn, timber, copper, oil, machinery. They increased production, forced it by fines and threats, then stripped the farmer of all he had for export at depreciated prices. But at home, the prices were not depreciated, but increased, so that the more we exported, the less the industrial worker in America had to eat. And really zealous county commissioners took from the farmer, after the patriotic manner of many Midwestern counties in 1918, even his seed grain, so that he could grow no more. And on the very acres where once he had raised superfluous wheat, he now starved for bread. And while he was starving, the commissioners continued to try to make him pay for the Corpo bonds which he had been made to buy on the installment plan. But still, when he did finally starve to death, none of these things worried him. There were bread lines now in Fort Beulah once or twice a week. The hardest phenomenon of dictatorship for a Doremus to understand even when he saw it daily in his own streets, even when he saw it daily in his own street, was the steady diminution of gaiety among the people. America, America, like England and Scotland, had never really been a gay nation. Rather, it had been heavily and noisily jocular, with a substratum of worry and insecurity, in the image of its patron saint, Lincoln of the rollicking stories and the tragic heart. But at least there had been hearty greetings, man to man. There had been clamorous jazz for dancing, and the lively, slangy catcalls of young people, and the nervous blatting of tremendous traffic. All that false cheerfulness lessened now day by day. This is pretty profound social critique right here. Um, Obviously, it's not new. It's been commented. It was probably commented by that French guy that first came around. What's that guy's name? He was a noble motherfucker. Let's see, French social anthropologist, early America. Mm, Claude Levi Strauss. Maybe it was before. French social reporter. Damn. Can't remember that guy's name. He was the guy that traveled America early on and like talked about our character. And yeah, we've always been overworked, underpaid, not enough time off, not enough like too short of lunch breaks, and a lot of it stems from this puritanical work ethic. At the same time, you've got the South, you've got Native Americans, you've got free people of color, folks who are more likely to relax and chill whenever they get a chance. You talk about island time, you know. But I think Sinclair Lewis, this is the white default, right? This is the when you think of America, quote unquote, you think of the 13 colonies, you think of New England, you think of that puritanical streak. Um, but America was also started in Jamestown, right? America also has this whole military thrust, these agnostic, humble, just scraggly ass people that came with the Puritans, and then the people who were already here, the people who were dragged here, um, and then all the immigrants then and now. Um, but yeah, this puritanical work ethic and joylessness is certainly a huge part of our character. Um, God, I'm getting tired of hearing myself talk, which is embarrassing. But I feel like it's important to get this context. So, the corpos found nothing more convenient to milk than public pleasures. After the bread had molded, the circuses were closed. There were taxes or increased taxes on motor cars, movies, theaters, dances, and ice cream sodas. There was a tax on playing a phonograph or radio in any restaurant. Lee Saracen, himself a bachelor, conceived of supertaxing bachelors and spinsters, contrariwise of taxing all weddings at which more than 5 persons were present. Even the most reckless youngsters went less and less to public entertainments because no one not ostentatiously in uniform cared to be noticed these days. It was impossible to sit in a public place without wondering which spies were watching you. So all the world stayed home and jumped anxiously at every passing footstep every telephone ring, every tap of an ivy sprig on the window. Um, so my context for this is other than like, Germany, East Germany, Doctor Who, that one episode where Amy Pond goes to the fascist state planet or ship, I guess. Planet ship. Uh is Iran and the graphic novel Persepolis by Satrapi. Can't remember her first name, but anyway, um her description of Iran and how like for non-religious folks, for revolutionary folks, like staying inside was huge. They could take their veils off, they could speak freely. Um yeah, yeah, when you're in an oppressive regime, why go outside? It's a fucking bummer. The score of people definitely pledged to the new underground were the only persons to whom Doremus dared talk about anything more incriminating than whether it was likely to rain, though he had been the friendliest gossip in town. Always, it had taken him 10 minutes longer than was humanly possible for him to walk to the informer office because he stopped on every corner to ask after someone's sick wife, politics, potato crop, opinions about deism, or luck at fishing. As he read of rebels against the regime who worked in Rome, in Berlin, he envied them. They had thousands of government agents, unknown by sight and thus the more dangerous to watch them. But also, they had thousands of comrades from whom to seek encouragement, exciting personal tattle, shop talk, and the assurance that they were not altogether idiotic to risk their lives for a mistress so ungrateful as revolution. Those secret flats in great cities, perhaps some of them really were filled with the rosy glow they had in fiction. But the Fort Beulahs, anywhere in the world, were so isolated, the conspirators so uninspiringly familiar one to another, that only by inexplicable faith could one go on. This uh, makes sense given Doremus's narrow view, but this is 100% true in all cases. And we've been misled by you know soaring tales about resistance. I even get into it in my podcast and my books. But in truth, resistances are always tiny, even in big cities, even in Paris. Like a resistance cell of more than 3 people, folks get busted, broken up, killed. It is by its very nature small. The idea is to inspire blowback against the people so the people rise up en masse. The resistance is always lonely and you have to put up with shitty people. Think of the story of Anne Frank being protected by a non-Jewish family in Amsterdam. And by the end of it, they were so mad at each other, you know? Like, I think I can't remember, did one of them fuck up and they got caught? Or I don't think one of them sold them out, or at least we don't know, but, like, it's hard. They're always small. We have this impression of like that Forrest Gump scene where they meet the Black Panthers and it's like, are these a whole bunch of strangers? I mean, they're just letting Forrest Gump in here, like and we take these tales as like, how it is, but revolutionary rallies are like not a thing, unless the government allows it and looks the other way. And what government does that except with fascists and the right wing? Because they do not threaten capitalism, the dominant paradigm. Um, And when I say capitalism, I'm also including communist one party states where the the way business is conducted is controlled, and the small operator has no place. There's no democracy. So whatever the word is for that, they threaten the dominant paradigm, the economic system that drives the whole need for cops. And like, oh, I could go on a huge tangent about all the cop that I have to see every other day at Fred Meyer. Like, why do they have cops? Like, is it to enforce the mask law? Like, I really want to ask, but I also just don't even want to see them. And one guy I almost went up to because I could have sworn his hand was on his belt, a little close to his gun, and I was like, "What the hell is this? Why is your hand on your gun?" Like, I was anyway. That's a whole episode. I don't need to get into it. Now that Lorinda was gone, there certainly was nothing very diverting in sneaking round corners, trying to look like somebody else, merely to meet Buck and Dan Wilgus and that good woman Sissy. Buck and he and the rest, they were such amateurs. They needed the guidance of veteran agitators like Mr. Ailey and Mr. Bailey and Mr. Cayley. Their feeble pamphlets, their smearily printed newspaper, seemed futile against the enormous blare of corpo propaganda. It seemed worse than futile. It seemed insane to risk martyrdom in a world where fascists persecuted communists, communists persecuted social democrats persecuted everybody who would stand for it, where Aryans who looked like Jews persecuted Jews who looked like Aryans, and Jews persecuted their debtors, where every statesman and clergyman praised peace and brightly asserted that the only way to get peace was to get ready for war. Some of the stuff in there I'm skeptical of, but I'm going to let it go. It's the 30s. It's trying to kind of both sides it. And obviously there's a little bit of truth to all of it, but you know, social democrats persecuting, like, I mean, I guess. Yeah. White racism, white feminism, like liberal racism. Um Even progressives, like, yeah. Whatever. Let's not get too in the weeds on that. What conceivable reason could one have for seeking after righteousness in a world which so hated righteousness? Why do anything except eat and read and make love and provide for sleep that should be secure against disturbance by armed policemen? He never did find any particularly good reason. He simply went on. I'm gonna read this again because one, because I said a few things dumb, like particularly, god damn it, that word I feel like is gonna be on my tombstone. Fuck that word. What conceivable reason could one have for seeking after righteousness in a world which so hated righteousness? Why do anything except eat and read and make love and provide? I did it again. Except eat and read and make love and provide for sleep that should be secure against disturbance by armed policemen. He never did find any particularly good reason. He simply went on. So this is the eternal paradox, and one that I experienced, um, is domestic life, self care. All of it takes you out of the struggle, right? At least for a few hours. And if you're not in the struggle 24 hours a day, can we succeed? And, vegans go through this, vegetarians, I'm a vegetarian, go through this. What are the bounds of ethical behavior? And what is the responsibility of the few of us that, you know, and I put that in quotes because all of us have an ethos that we stand by, and even if it's shitty to to many of us. Um, and so, what are the bounds? How do we determine that we've done enough? Even fucking Jesus Christ, this like noble ideal in the Bible goes, God, why hast thou forsaken me? You know, like, and then he goes, like, they forgive them not, for they know not what they do. Even at the end, he's trying to justify his policies, his existence, his work, like needs to be reassured. The motherfucker who spends his entire life reassuring and forgiving everyone else needs it. And it's true. Like even as an artist, right? I more or less set aside activism so I could focus on art and self-care and healing and all that bullshit. Um I don't work enough. I don't edit enough. I'm sure if I pulled everyone in my podcast network, Sinister Parent Company, they would have similar thoughts. It just it when is enough enough? Am I doing enough? Am I active enough? Am I setting aside Black Lives Matter to do this? Like, am I showing people that I don't care about them, or that I don't care about, oppression of other folks? It hasn't affected me yet, but I know it's affecting other people, racism, sexism, um, uh, transphobia. Anywho, in June, when the Fort Beulah cell of the new underground had been carrying on for some 3 months, Mr. Francis Tasbro, the Golden Quarryman, called on his neighbor Doremus. How are you, Frank? Wait. How are you, Frank? Fine, Remus. How's the old carping critic? Fine, Frank. Still carping. Fine carping weather at that. Have a cigar? Thanks. Got a match? Thanks. Saw Sissy yesterday. She looks fine. Yes, she's fine. I saw Malcolm driving by yesterday. How did he like it in the provincial university at New York? Oh, fine. Fine. He says the athletics are grand. They're getting Primo Carnera over to coach in tennis next year. I think it's Carnera. I think it's tennis. But anyway, the athletics are fine there, Malcolm says. Say, Remus, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. The fact is, I want you to be sure and not repeat this to anybody. I know you can be trusted with a secret, even if you are a newspaper man, or used to be, I mean. But is, and this is inside stuff, official. There's going to be some governmental promotions all along the line. This is confidential, and it comes to me straight from the provincial commissioner, Colonel Hake. Luthorn is finished as Secretary of War. He's a nice fellow, but he hasn't got as much publicity for the corpos out of his office as the chief expected him to. Hake is to have his job and also take over the position of High Marshal of the Minutemen from Lee Saracen. I suppose Saracen has too much to do. Well, then, John Sullivan Reek is slated to be Provincial commissioner. That leaves the office of district commissioner for Vermont, New Hampshire empty, and I'm one of the people being seriously considered. I've done a lot of speaking for the corpos, and I know Dewey Hake very well. I was able to advise him about erecting public buildings. Of course, there's none of the county commissioners around here that measure up to a district commissionership. Not even Dr. Stobmeyer. Certainly not Shad Ledoux. Now, if you could see your way clear to throw in with me, your influence would help.
Good heavens, Frank. The worst thing you could have happen if you want the job is to have me favor you. The corpos don't like me. Oh, of course they know I'm loyal, not one of these dirty, sneaking anti-corpos, but I never made enough noise in the paper to please them.
That's just it, Remus. I've got a really striking idea. Even if they don't like you, the corpos respect you, and they know how long you've been important in the state. We'd all be greatly pleased if you came out and joined us. Now, just suppose you did so, and let people know that it was my influence that converted you to corpoism. That might give me quite a leg up. And between old friends like us, Remus, I can tell you that this job of district commissioner would be useful to me in the quarry business, aside from the social advantages. And if I got the position, I could promise you that I'd either get the informer taken away from Stobmeyer and that dirty little stinker Itchett, and given back to you to run absolutely as you pleased. Providing, of course, you had the sense to keep from criticizing the chief and the state. Or if you'd rather, I think I could probably wangle a job. Or if you'd rather, I think I could probably wangle a job for you as military judge. They don't necessarily have to be lawyers. Or maybe President Peasley's job as district director of education. You'd have a lot of fun out of that. Awfully amusing the way all the teachers kiss the director's foot. Come on, old man. Think of all the fun we used to have in the old days. Come to your senses and face the inevitable, and join us and fix up some good publicity for me. How about it? Huh? Huh?
Doremus reflected that the worst trial of a revolutionary propagandist was not risking his life, but having to be civil to people like future Commissioner Tasbro. He supposed that his voice was polite as he muttered, "Afraid I'm too old to try it, Frank." But apparently Tasbro was offended. He sprang up and tramped away, grumbling,
"Oh, very well then."
And I didn't give him a chance to say anything about being realistic or breaking eggs to make an omelet, regretted Doremus.
I'm going to get some coffee.
Ever since he mentioned ice cream floats, like that's been like on my mind. The next day, Malcolm Tasbro, meeting Sissy on the street, made his beefy most of cutting her. At the time, the Jessops thought that was very amusing. They thought the occasion less amusing when Malcolm chased little David out of the Tasbro apple orchard, which he had been wont to use as the great western fortress which he had been wont to use as the great western forest, where at any time one was rather more than likely to meet Kit Carson, Robin Hood, and Colonel Lindbergh hunting together. Having only Frank's word for it, Doremus could do no more than hint in Vermont vigilance that Colonel Dewey Hake was to be made Secretary of War, and give Hake's actual military record, which included the facts that, as a first lieutenant in France in 1918, he had been under fire for less than 15 minutes, and that his one real triumph had been commanding state militia during a strike in Oregon, when 11 strikers had been shot down, 5 of them in the back. Then Doremus forgot Tasbro completely and happily. That's interesting. Um, as a union man, I hate to hear about the bad guys killing strikers. But it's so much a part of our history that I even include it in my podcast and books is the oppression of strikers and labor leaders. It's so fucked up the things the United States and our corporations have done to union people and organizers in Central and South America. And really, I mean, it extends to South Korea and Japan, like anywhere we've had military influence. Fuck, it sucks. All the things we used to do in country, as we sort of stopped doing them, like shooting our citizens with live bullets, we just do overseas. Which isn't to say that we didn't do it to our own citizens all the way back to whenever. Chapter 30. But worse than having to be civil to the fatuous Mr. Tasbro was keeping his mouth shut when, toward the end of June, a newspaper man at Baddington, Vermont, was suddenly arrested as editor of Vermont Vigilance and author of all the pamphlets by Doremus and Lorinda. He went to concentration camp. Buck and Dan Wilgus and Sissy prevented Doremus from confessing and from even going to call on the victim. And when, with Lorinda no longer there as confidant, Doremus tried to explain it all to Emma, she said, "Wasn't it lucky that the government had blamed somebody else?" It's like Sinclair Lewis has a grudge against his wife or something. Like, what a hmm. Kids are grown. Just get the fuck out of there. She sucks. Except now she knows all their secrets. Fuck. Oh no. This is bad. This whole chapter is probably going to piss me off. Emma had worked out the theory that the NU activity was some sort of a naughty game which kept her boy, Doremus, busy after his retirement. He was mildly nagging the corpos. She wasn't sure that it was really nice to nag the legal authorities, but still, for a little fellow, her Doremus had always been surprisingly spunky. Just like, she often confided to Sissy, a spunky little Scotch terrier she had owned when she was a girl. Mr. McNabbit, its name had been, a little Scotch terrier. But my, so spunky he acted like he was a regular lion. She was rather glad that Lorinda was gone, Though she liked Lorinda and worried about how well she might do with a tea room in a town where she had never lived. But she just couldn't help feeling, she confided not only to Sissy, but to Mary and Buck, that Lorinda, with all her wild, crazy ideas about women's rights and workmen being just as good as their employers, had a bad influence on Doremus's tendency to show off and shock people. She mildly wondered why Buck and Sissy snorted so. She hadn't meant to say anything particularly funny. Particularly. Fuck you. For too many years, she had been used to Doremus's irregular routine to have her sleep disturbed by his returning from Bucks at the improper time to which she referred as at all hours, but she did wish he would be more on time for his meals, and she gave up the question of why these days he seemed to like to associate with ordinary people like John Polycop, Dan Wilgus, Daniel Babcock, and Pete Voutong. My, some people said Pete couldn't even read and write, and Doremus so educated and all. Why didn't he see more of lovely people like Frank Tasbro and Professor Stobmeyer and Mr. R.C. Crowley and this new friend of his, the Honorable John Sullivan Reek? Is there someone in your life that is like this? Who defends or like secretly harbors support for someone who has specifically targeted someone you love for abuse? Um, Her son-in-law was murdered by these people. You know, boy howdy. Boy howdy. Why couldn't he keep out of politics? She'd always said they were no occupation for a gentleman. Like David, now 10 years old, and like 20 or 30 million other Americans, from 1 to 100, but all of the same mental age. Emma thought the marching MMs were a very fine show indeed, so much like movies of the Civil War, really quite educational. And while, of course, if Doremus didn't care for President Windrip, she was opposed to him also. Yet didn't Mr. Windrip speak beautifully about pure language, church attendance, low taxation, and the American flag? The realists, the makers of omelets, did climb, as Tasbro had predicted. Colonel Dewey Hake, commissioner of the Northeastern Province, became Secretary of War and High Marshal of MMs, while the former secretary, Colonel Luthorn, retired to Kansas and the real estate business, and was well spoken of by all businessmen for being thus willing to give up the grandeur of Washington for duty toward practical affairs and his family, who were throughout the press depicted as having frequently missed him. It was rumored in NU cells that Hake might go higher even than Secretary of War, that Windrip was worried by the forced growth of a certain effeminacy in Lee Saracen under the arc light of glory. Francis Tasbro was elevated to district commissionership at Hanover, but Mr. Sullivan Reek did not in series go on to be provincial commissioner. It was said that he had too many friends among just the old line politicians whose jobs the corpos were so enthusiastically taking. No, the new provincial commissioner, Viceroy and General, was military judge Effingham Swan, the one man whom Mary Jessup Greenhill hated more than she did Shad Ledoux. Swan was a splendid commissioner. Within 3 days after taking office, he had John Sullivan Reek and 7 assistant district commissioners arrested, tried, and imprisoned, all within 24 hours. And an 80-year-old woman, mother of a new underground agent, but not otherwise accused of wickedness, penned in a concentration camp for the more desperate traitors. It was in a disused quarry, which was always a foot deep in water. After he had sentenced her, Swan was said to have bowed to her most courteously. God, I'm getting redder by the moment. Ugh. I'll be like purple by the end of this. The new underground sent out warning from headquarters in Montreal for a general tightening up of precautions against being caught distributing propaganda. Agents were disappearing rather alarmingly. Buck scoffed, but Doremus was nervous. He noticed that the same strange man, ostensibly a drummer, a large man with unpleasant eyes, had twice got into conversation with him in the Hotel Wessex lobby, and too obviously hinted that he was anti corpo and would love to have Doremus say something nasty about the chief and the MMs. Doremus became cautious about going out to Buck's. He parked his car in half a dozen different wood roads and crept afoot to the secret basement. On the evening of the 28th of June, 1938, he had a notion that he was being followed. So closely did a car with red tinted headlights, anxiously watched in his rearview mirror, stick behind him as he took the Keesmit Highway down to Bucks. He turned up a side road, down another. The spy car followed. He stopped in a driveway on the left-hand side of the road and angrily stepped out, in time to see the other car pass, with a man who looked like Shad Ledoux driving. He swung round then, and, without concealment, bolted for Buck's. In the basement, Buck was contentedly tying up bundles of the vigilance, while Father Parafix, in his shirt sleeves, vest open and black dickies swinging beneath his reversed collar, sat at a plain pine table, writing a warning to New England Catholics that though the corpos had, unlike the Nazis in Germany, been shrewd enough to flatter prelates, they had lowered the wages of French Canadian Catholic mill hands and imprisoned their leaders just as severely as in the case of the avowedly wicked Protestants. Parafix smiled up at Doremus, stretched, lighted a pipe, and chuckled. As a great ecclesiast, Doremus, is it your opinion that I shall be committing a venial or a mortal sin by publishing this little masterpiece, the work of my favorite author, without the bishop's imprimatur? Stephen, Buck, I think they're on to us. Maybe we've got to fold up already and get the press and type out of here. He told of being shadowed. He telephoned to Julian at at headquarters, and since there were too many French Canadian inspectors about for him to dare to use his brand of French, he telephoned in the fine new German he had been learning by translation. Denkst du, ihr Freund, der haben a Idee, die Letztag von wat wir match her? And the college bred Julian had so much international culture as to be able to answer, Ja, ich mein, ihr was such in morning free. Look over. How could they move? Where? Dan Wilgus arrived in panic an hour after.
Say, they're watching us.
Doremus, Buck, and the priest gathered round the black Viking of a man.
Just now, when I came in, I thought I heard something in the bushes, here in the yard, near the house. And before I thought, I flashed my torch on him. And by golly, if it wasn't Eris Dilly, and not in uniform. And you know how Eris loves his god. Excuse me, father, how he loves his uniform. He was disguised. Sure, in overalls. Looked like a jackass that's gone under a clothesline. Well, he'd been rubbering at the house. Of course, these curtains are drawn, but I don't know what he saw, and
the three large men looked to Doremus for orders.
We got to get all this stuff out of here. Quick, take it and hide it in Truman Webb's attic. Stephen, get John Polycop and Mungo Kitterick and Pete Vutong on the phone. Get 'em here, quick. Tell John to stop by and tell Julian to come as soon as he can. Dan, start dismantling the press. Buck, bundle up all the literature.
As he spoke, Doremus was wrapping type in scraps of newspaper. And at 3 next morning, before light, Polycop was driving toward Truman Webb's farmhouse, the entire equipment of the new underground printing establishment in Buck's old farm truck, from which blatted, for the benefit of all ears that might be concerned, two frightened calves. Next day, Julian ventured to invite his superior officers, Shad Ledoux and Emil Staubmeyer, to a poker session at Buck's. They came with alacrity. They found Buck, Doremus, Mungo Kitterick, and Doc Itchett, the last an entirely innocent participant in certain deceptions. They played in Buck's parlor, but during the evening, Buck announced that anyone wanting beer instead of whiskey would find it in a tub of ice in the basement, and that anyone wishing to wash his hands would find 2 bathrooms upstairs. Shad hastily went for beer. Doc Itchett even more hastily went to wash his hands. Both of them were gone much longer than one would have expected. When the party broke up and Buck and Doremus were alone, Buck shrieked with bucolic mirth.
I could scarcely keep a straight face when I heard good old Shad opening the cupboards and taking a fine long look-see for pamphlets down in the basement. Well, Captain Jessup, that about ends their suspicion of this place as a den of traitors, I guess. God, but isn't Shad dumb?
This was at perhaps 3 a.m. on the morning of June 30th. Doremus stayed home, writing sedition all the afternoon and evening of the 30th, hiding the sheets under pages of newspaper in the Franklin stove in his study so that he could touch them off with a match in case of a raid, a trick he had learned from Carl Billinger's anti-Nazi Fatherland. This new opus was devoted to murders ordered by Commissioner Effingham Swan. On the 1st and 2nd of July, when he sauntered uptown, he was rather noticeably encountered by the same weighty drummer who had picked him up in the Hotel Wessex lobby before, and who now insisted on their having a drink together. Doremus escaped, excuse me, Doremus escaped and was conscious that he was being followed by an unknown young man, flamboyant in an apricot colored polo shirt and gray bags, whom he recognized as having worn uniform at a parade in June. On July 3rd, rather panicky, Doremus drove to Truman Webb's, taking an hour of zigzagging to do it, and warned Truman not to permit any more printing till he should have a release. When Doremus went home, Sissy lightly informed him that Shad had insisted she go out to an picnic with him on the next afternoon, the 4th, and that, information or no, she had refused. She was afraid of him, surrounded by his ready playmates. That night of the 3rd, Doremus slept only in sick spasms. He was reasonlessly convinced that he would be arrested before dawn. The night was overcast and electric and uneasy. The crickets sounded as though they were piping under compulsion in a rhythm of terror. He lay throbbing to their sound. He wanted to flee, but how and where? And how could he leave his threatened family? For the first time in years, he wished that he were sleeping beside the unperturbable Emma, beside her small earthly hillock of a body. He laughed at himself. What could Emma do to protect him against Minutemen? Just scream. And what then? But he, who always slept with his door shut to protect his sacred aloneness, popped out of bed to open the door, that he might have the comfort of hearing her breathe, and the fiercer Mary stir and slumber, and Sissy's unoccasional young whimper. He was awakened before dawn by early firecrackers. He heard the tramping of feet. He lay taut. Then he awoke again at 7:30 and was slightly angry that nothing happened. The MMs brought out their burnished helmets and all the rideable horses in the neighborhood, some of them known as most superior plow horses, for the great celebration of the new freedom on the morning of 4th of July. There was no post of the American Legion in the jaunty parade. That organization had been completely suppressed, and a number of American Legion leaders had been shot. Others had tactfully taken posts in the itself. The troops in Hollow Square, with the ordinary citizenry humbly jammed in behind them, and the Jessup family, rather hoity-toity on the outskirts, were addressed by ex-Governor Isham Hubbard, a fine, ruddy old rooster who could say cock-a-doodle-doo with more profundity than any fowl since Aesop. He announced that the chief had extraordinary resemblances to Washington, Jefferson, and William B. McKinley, and to Napoleon on his better days. The trumpets blew. The MMs gallantly marched off nowhere in particular, and Doremus went home, feeling much better after his laugh. Following noon dinner, since it was raining, he proposed a game of contract to Emma, Mary, and Sissy, with Mrs. Candy as volunteer umpire. But the thunder of the hill country disquieted him. Whenever he was dummy, he ambled to a window. The rain ceased. The sun came out for a false, hesitating moment, and the wet grass looked unreal. Clouds with torn bottoms, like the hem of a ragged skirt, were driven down the valley, cutting off the bulk of Mount Faithful. The sun went out as in a mammoth catastrophe, and instantly the world was in unholy darkness, which poured into the room. "Why, it's quite dark, isn't it? Sissy, turn on the lights," said Emma. The rain attacked again in a crash, and to Doremus, looking out, the whole knowable world seemed washed out. Through the deluge, he saw a huge car flash, the great wheels throwing up fountains. Wonder what make of car that is. Must be a 16-cylinder Cadillac, I guess, reflected Doremus. The car swerved into his own gateway, almost knocking down a gatepost, and stopped with a jar at his porch. From it leaped 5 Minutemen, black waterproof capes over their uniforms. Before he could quite get through the reflection that he recognized none of them, they were there in the room. The leader, an ensign, and most certainly Doremus did not recognize him, marched up to Doremus, looked at him casually, and struck him full in the face. Except for the one light pink of the bayonet when he had been arrested before, except for an occasional toothache or headache, or a smart when he had banged a fingernail, Doremus Jessup had not for 30 years known authentic pain. It was as incredible as it was horrifying, this torture in his eyes and nose and crushed mouth. He stood bent, gasping, and the ensign again smashed his face and observed, "You are under arrest." Mary had launched herself on the ensign, was hitting at him with a china ashtray. Two MMs dragged her off, threw her on a couch, and one of them pinned her there. The other two guards were bulking over the paralyzed Emma, the galvanized sissy. Doremus vomited. Doremus vomited suddenly and collapsed as though he were dead drunk. He was conscious that the 5 MMs were yanking the books from the shelves and hurling them on the floor so that the covers split, and with their pistol butts smashing vases and lampshades and small occasional tables. One of them tattooed a rough MM on the white paneling above the fireplace with shots from his automatic. The ensign said only, "Careful, Jim," and kissed the hysterical sissy. Doremus struggled to get up. An MM kicked him in the elbow. It felt like death itself, and Doremus writhed on the floor. He heard them tramping upstairs. He remembered then that his manuscript about the murders by Provincial Commissioner Effingham Swan was hidden in the Franklin stove in his study. The sound of their smashing of furniture in the bedrooms on the second floor was like that of a dozen woodchoppers gone mad. In all his agony, Doremus struggled to get up, to set fire to the papers in the stove before they should be found. He tried to look at his women. He could make out Mary tied to the couch. When had that ever happened? But his vision was too blurred, his mind too bruised to see anything clearly. Staggering, sometimes creeping on his hands and knees, he did actually get past the men in the bedrooms and up the stairs to the third floor and his study. He was in time to see the ensign throwing his best beloved books and his letter files, accumulated these 20 years, out of the study window, to see him search the papers in the Franklin stove, look up with cheerful triumph and cackle. "Nice piece you've written here, I guess, Jessup. Commissioner Swan will love to see it." "I demand see Commissioner Ledoux, District Commissioner Tasbro, friends of mine," stammered Doremus. "Don't know a thing about them. I'm running this show." The ensign chuckled and slapped Doremus, not very painfully, merely with a shamefulness as great as Doremus's, when he realized that he had been so cowardly as to appeal to Shad and Francis. He did not open his mouth again, did not whimper nor even amuse the troopers by vainly appealing on behalf of the women. As he was hustled down 2 flights of stairs, they threw him down the lower flight, and he landed on his raw shoulder and out to the big car. The driver, who had been waiting behind the wheel, already had the engine running. The car whined away, threatening every instant to skid. But the Doremus, who had been queasy about skidding, did not notice. What could he do about it anyway? He was helpless between 2 troopers in the back seat, and his powerlessness to make the driver slow up seemed part of all his powerlessness before the dictator's power. He who had always so taken it for granted that in his dignity and social security he was just slightly superior to laws and judges and policemen, to all the risks and pain of ordinary workers. He was unloaded like a bulky mule at the jail entrance of the courthouse. He resolved that when he was led before Shad, he resolved that when he was led before Shad, he would so rebuke the scoundrel that he would not forget it. But Doremus was not taken into the courthouse. He was kicked toward a large, black painted, unlettered truck by the entrance. Literally kicked, while even in his bewildered anguish he speculated, I wonder which is worse, the physical pain of being kicked or the mental humiliation of being turned into a slave. Hell, don't be sophistical. It's the pain in the behind that hurts most. This is the experience of Black people in America. Of course, anybody who's been arrested by a shitty police force, but particularly, and if we look at the modern period, 5-10 years ago, Chicago had a farm with judges and prosecutors and shit to send black men up for simple drug charges, to hold them without charge, to basically black site prison, torture them. Yeah. Maybe longer than 5 or 10 years, but very recently a judge went to prison for it. I think it was the one in Chicago. I mean, there's been more than one. Sheriff Arpaio, like in Arizona, is probably guilty of a lot of that stuff as well. I don't think he's been charged for anything, though. He was hiked up a stepladder into the back of the truck. From the unlighted interior, a moan. My God, not you too, Dormouse. It was the voice of Buck Titus, and with him as prisoners were Truman Webb and Dan Wilgus. Dan was in handcuffs because he had fought so. The 4 men were too sore to talk much as they felt the truck lurch away and they were thrown against one another. Once Doremus spoke truthfully. I don't know how to tell you how ghastly sorry I am to have got you into this. And once he lied when Buck groaned, did those blankety blank blankum dash blank hurt the girls? They must have ridden for 3 hours. Doremus was in such a coma of suffering that even though his back winced as it bounced against the rough floor and his face was all one neuralgia, he drowsed and woke to terror, drowsed and woke to his own helpless wailing. The truck stopped. The doors were opened on lights thick among white brick buildings. He hazily saw that they were on the one-time Dartmouth campus, headquarters now of the Corpo District Commissioner. That commissioner was his old acquaintance, Francis Tasbro. He would be released. They would be freed, all 4. The incredulity of his humiliation cleared away. He came out of his sick fear like a shipwrecked man sighting an approaching boat. But he did not see Tasbro. The MMs, silent save for mechanical cursing, drove him into a hallway, into a cell which had once been part of a sedate classroom, left him with a final clout on the head. He dropped on a wooden pallet with a straw pillow and was instantly asleep. He was too dazed, he who usually looked recordingly at places, to note then or afterward what his cell was like, except that it appeared to be filled with sulfuric fumes from a locomotive engine. When he came to, his face seemed frozen stiff. His coat was torn and foul with the smell of vomit. He felt degraded, as though he had done something shameful. His door was violently opened. A dirt-clotted bowl of feeble coffee, with a crust of bread faintly smeared with oleomargarine, was thrust at him, and after he had given them up, nauseated, he was marched out into the corridor by two guards, just as he wanted to go to the toilet. Even that he could forget in even that he could forget in the even that he could forget in the paralysis of fear. One guard seized him by the trim small beard and yanked it, laughing very much. Always did want to see whether a billy goat whisker would pull out or not, snickered the guard. While he was thus tormented, Doremus received a crack behind his ear from the other man and a scolding command. Come on, goat. Want us to milk you? You dirty little so-and-so? What you in for? You look like a little K-word Taylor, you little blankety blank. Him? The other scoffed. Nah, he's some kind of half-eared hick newspaper editor. They'll sure shoot him. Sedition. But I hope they'll beat hell out of him first for being such a bum editor. Him? An editor? Say, listen, I got a swell idea. Hey, fellas! 4 or 5 other MMs, half dressed, looked out from a room down the hall. This here's a writing fellow. I'm going to make him show us how he writes. Look it. The guard dashed down the corridor to a door with the sign Gents hung out in front of it, came back with paper, not clean, threw it in front of Doremus and yammered, Come on, boss, show us how you write your pieces. Come on, write us a piece with your nose. He was iron strong. He pressed Doremus's nose down against the filthy paper and held it there while his mates giggled. They were interrupted by an officer commanding, though leniently, Come on, boys, cut out the monkey shines and take this blank blank to the bullpen. Trial this morning. Doremus was led to a dirty room in which half a dozen prisoners were waiting. One of them was Buck Titus. Over one eye, Buck had a slatternly bandage which had so loosened as to show that his forehead was cut to the bone. Buck managed to wink jovially. Doremus tried, vainly, to keep from sobbing. He waited an hour, standing, arms tight at his side, at the demands of an ugly-faced guard, snapping a dog whip with which he twice slashed Doremus when his hands fell lax. Buck was led into the trial room just before him. The door was closed. Doremus heard Buck cry out terribly, as though he had been wounded to death. The cry faded into a choked gasping. When Buck was led out of the inner room, his face was as dirty and as pale as his bandage, over which blood was now creeping. The man at the door of the inner room jerked his thumb sharply at Doremus and snarled, You're next! Now he would face Tasbro. But in the small room into which he had been taken, and he was confused because somehow he had expected a large courtroom. There was only the ensign who had arrested him yesterday, sitting at a table, running through papers, while a stolid MM stood on either side of him, rigid, hand on pistol holster. The ensign kept him waiting, then snapped with disheartening suddenness, "Your name!" "You know it." The two guards beside Doremus each hit him. "Your name?" "Doremus Jessup." "You're a communist." "No, I'm not." 25 lashes. And the oil. Not believing, not understanding, Doremus was rushed across the room into a cellar beyond. A long wooden table there was dark with dry blood, stank with dry blood. The guard seized Doremus, sharply jerked his head back, pried open his jaws, and poured in a quart of castor oil. They tore off his garments above the belt, flung them on the sticky floor. They threw him face downward on the long table and began to lash him with a one-piece steel fishing rod. Each stroke cut into the flash Each stroke cut into the flesh of his back, and they beat him slowly, relishing it to keep him from fainting too quickly. But he was unconscious when, to the guard's great diversion, the castor oil took effect. Indeed, he did not know it till he found himself limp on a messy piece of gunny sacking on the floor of his cell. They awakened him twice during the night to demand, "You're a communist, eh? You better admit it. We're going to beat the living tar out of you till you do." Though he was sicker than he had ever been in his life, yet he was also angrier. Too angry to admit anything whatever, even to save his wrecked life. He simply snarled, "No." But on the third beating, he savagely wondered if no was now a truthful answer. After each questioning, he was pounded again with fists, but not lashed with the steel rod, because the headquarters doctor had forbidden it. He was a sporty-looking young doctor in plufors. He yawned at the guards in the blood-reeking cellar. "Better cut out the lashes, or this blankety blank will pass out on you." Doremus raised his head from the table to gasp. "You call yourself a doctor? And you associate with these murderers?" "Oh, shut up, you little blankety blank. Dirty traitors like you deserve to be beaten to death. And maybe you will be, but I think the boys ought to save you for the trial." The doctor showed his scientific mettle by twisting Doremus's ear till it felt as though it were torn off, chuckled, "Go to it, boys," and ambled away, ostentatiously humming. For 3 nights he was questioned and lashed, once, late at night, by guards who complained of the inhuman callousness of their officers in making them work so late. They amused themselves by using an old harness strap with a buckle on it to beat him. He almost broke down when the examining ensign declared that Buck Titus had confessed their illegal propaganda and narrated so many details of the work and narrated so many details of the work that Doremus could almost have believed in the confession. He did not listen. He told himself, no, Buck would die before he'd confess anything. It's all Aristille's spying. The ensign cooed. "Now, if you'll just have the sense to copy your friend Titus, and tell us who's in the conspiracy besides him and you and Wilgus and Webb, we'll let you go. We know, all right. Oh, we know the whole plot. But we just want to find out whether you've finally come to your senses and been converted, my little friend. Now, who else was there? Just give us their names. We'll let you go. Or would you like the castor oil and the whip again? Doremus did not answer. 10 lashes, said the ensign. He was chased out for half an hour's walk on the campus every afternoon. Probably because he would have preferred lying on his hard cot, trying to keep still enough so that his heart would stop its deathly hammering. 100 prisoners marched there, round and round senselessly. He passed Buck Titus. To salute him would have meant a blow from the guards. They greeted each other with quick eyelids, and when he saw those untroubled spaniel eyes, Doremus knew that Buck had not squealed. And in the exercise yard he saw Dan Wilgus, but Dan was not walking free. He was led out from the torture rooms by guards, and with his crushed nose, his flattened ear, he looked as though he had been pounded by a prize fighter. He seemed partly paralyzed. Doremus tried to get information about Dan from a guard in his cell corridor. The guard, a handsome, clear-cheeked young man, noted in a valley of the White Mountains as a local beau, and very kind to his mother, laughed. Ah, oh, your friend Wilgus? That chump thinks he can lick his weight in wildcats. I hear he always tries to soak the guards. They'll take that out of him, all right. They'll take that out of him, all right. Doremus thought that night, he could not be sure, but he thought he heard Dan wailing half the night. Next morning, he was told that Dan, who had always been so disgusted when he had had to set up the news of a weakling's suicide, had hanged himself in his cell. Okay. Page and a half left. Then, unexpectedly, Doremus was taken into a room, this time reasonably large, a former English classroom turned into a court for his trial. But it was not District Commissioner Francis Tasbro who was on the bench, nor any military judge, but no less a protector of the people than the great new provincial commissioner, Effingham Swan. Swan was looking at Doremus's article about him as Doremus was led up to stand before the bench. He spoke, and this harsh, tired-looking man was no longer the airy Rhodes Scholar who had sported with Doremus once like a boy pulling the wings off flies. Jessup, do you plead guilty to seditious activities? Why? Doremus looked helplessly about for something in the way of legal counsel. Commissioner Tasbro, called Swan. So at last Doremus did see his boyhood playmate. Tasbro did nothing so commendable as to avoid Doremus's eyes. Indeed, he looked at Doremus directly, and most affably, as he spoke his piece. Your Excellency, it gives me great pain to have to expose this man Jessup, whom I have known all my life, and tried to help, but he always was a smart aleck. He was a laughingstock in Fort Beulah for the way he tried to show off as a great political leader. And when the chief was elected, he was angry because he didn't get any political office, and he went about everywhere trying to disaffect people. I have heard him do so myself. That's enough. Thanks. County Commissioner Ledoux, Captain Ledoux, is it or is it not true that the man Jessup tried to persuade you to join a violent plot against my person? But Shad did not look at Doremus as he mumbled, "It's true." Swan crackled. Gentlemen, I think that, plus the evidence contained in the prisoner's own manuscript, which I hold here, is sufficient testimony. Prisoner, if it weren't for your age and your damn silly senile weakness, I'd sentence you to 100 lashes, as I do all the other communists like you that threaten the corporate state. As it is, I sentence you to be held in concentration camp at the will of the court, but with a minimum sentence of 17 years. Doremus calculated rapidly. He was 62 now. He would be 79 then. He never would see freedom again. And in the power of issuing emergency decrees conferred upon me as provincial commissioner, I also sentence you to death by shooting, but I suspend that sentence, though only until such time as you may be caught trying to escape. And I hope you'll have just lots and lots of time in prison, Jessup, to think about how clever you were in this entrancing article you wrote about me. And to remember that any nasty cold morning they may take you out in the rain and shoot you. He ended with a mild suggestion to the guards. And 20 lashes. 2 minutes later, they had forced castor oil down him. He lay trying to bite at the stained wood of the whipping table, and he could hear the whish of the steel fishing rod as a guard playfully tried it out in the air before bringing it down across the crisscross wounds of his raw back. Mm, that is the business. I think I'm going to call it there. I don't know how much there is to say. This is all pretty straightforward. Villains being villainous, them making him sweat a day. Um, just same old stuff the FBI does to suspects, just fucking try to turn you, try to trick you, constantly fuck with you, and then grab you, and then torture you, give you a show trial, and put you to death. Or in this case, send you to a concentration camp, which often become or can become a death camp. Man, a lot of blankety blanks in there. I wasn't sure how to how to do that. It's weird. One said, "Did those M dash M dash M dash and then spelled out M dash hurt the girls?" Man. Oh, and there was that. Like what happened to his family? Like, ugh, so gross. Oh, and let's remember, torture is only used for false confessions and to get people to turn on people they wouldn't ordinarily turn on. Notoriously gets false intelligence. It's useless except in a totalitarian context. So it's not great. Really good explorations of this in Star Trek. You see it in Star Wars, The Force Awakens. Um, between Kylo Ren and what's his name? Poe Dameron. I guess that's it. Gosh. Hopefully we don't have to deal with this anytime soon. Um
at least here in America. Obviously, as I've said before, it happens all around the world, and even to certain populations here in the United States. Um, just because we have a Democrat in the White House in a month or 2 months from now, 2 and a half, 3, whatever. Um, it just means that it'd be a bigger surprise if this shit came down, but, it's nothing to rule it out, you know? Kamala Harris gives off a real dictator vibe, like, she does not give a shit. She will mock the poor left and right, and her supporters claim she doesn't. Like, of all the supporters in the election on the Democratic Party side, hers were the most toxic. She she is just clearly without conscience just by looking at her, you know? So who knows? I mean, Biden could easily die a month into uh, ca- his presidency, so any whoozle be. We'll see how things go. Trump might hold on to his fucking death cult, and God knows what happens a year from now. So, anyway, it's good to always be vigilant. And yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, everything is awesome podcast at gmail.com. Find me on Twitter or Facebook at El Jefe Tacoma. We have a Facebook group, Friends of Everything is Awesome. You can send me your work. I might read it on the air, critique or praise, whatever you're into. You could be anonymous. I do stuff like that on Everything is Awesome. I also interview cool artists and writers on there, and occasionally just like really interesting people talk about the issues that matter most. And got a couple really good ones in the can for after this. Once this project is done, what did I get through? 4 chapters there, so there should be like 6 left, or no? Next one is 30. Oh, there's 38, so there's 9 left. God damn. I thought there were 37. Fucking A. So, it's a longer book than I thought, and, the dark period is lasting longer than I thought. Anyway, love y'all. Thanks for listening. Take care, and, I'll see you later. Peace.